Hello everyone. Razorblade Mango here. And today I want to talk about what is one of my most anticipated games of 2025, Split Fiction. This is the new game from Hazelight Studios, who of course is led by the madman that is Joseph Fares and published by Electronic Arts. This is the latest game in Hazelight's library that focuses exclusively on co-op play. So if you want to play this, you absolutely must play this with another person. There is no option for an AI partner. There's no option to play it by yourself. You have to find someone to play with. It can be local play or online play, but just know up front that this is a game you absolutely need another person to play with. So I have been a big fan of Hazelight for a long time, longer than the company has been known as Hazelight, because the core team are made up of the same people who worked on Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons, which is a game that I love. And that was also directed by Joseph Fares. It was his debut game. And since then, he left that studio to form Hazelight with that core team. They debuted with the game A Way Out, which is a game I really enjoy. And then a couple of years later, they announced that they were working on It Takes Two. They released that the following year, and that went on to be my favorite game of the year that it came out, and one of my all-time favorite games. I adore It Takes Two. And what's interesting is at the time, I said out loud that I don't think Hazelight will be able to top this. Because the thing about It Takes Two is that it constantly switches up gameplay mechanics, environments, different scenarios. It just has this overwhelmingly creative array of different ideas that they found a cohesive way to meld together into this amazing gameplay experience. I would argue probably the greatest co-op game ever made. So it says a lot about my respect and admiration for Hazelight that while I think Split Fiction is their weakest game to date, and I'm kind of including Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons in there because it's from the same core team, I still think Split Fiction is very good. So to start with the positives, this is a beautiful game. And what's really amazing about it is that even though it relies on offline and online co-op, it runs so smoothly for an Unreal Engine 5 game that I almost couldn't believe that it was Unreal Engine 5. I've seen other projects that have less going on in them graphically and animation-wise run poorer than Split Fiction does. And again, you have to account for more than one player in a game like this. So it really speaks to not only the creative prowess, but the technical prowess of Hazelight, that they're able to get something like this to look and run as well as it does. And I just think the art direction is great. I think the color palette is extremely appealing to look at. The character animations are fantastic. For the amount of environments that this game has, it really is incredible that despite you having to move around and use physics-based mechanics in a lot of these environments, the game never once technically buckles under the weight of what's going on the screen at the same time. And I kept loudly remarking over and over and over again while playing this that I can't believe that this game is running as well as it does for Unreal Engine 5. Which is an engine that is notorious for having technical problems. And another thing that's really impressive about Split Fiction are the basic controls and the movement, which is just solid as a rock. And this is a game that demands a lot of platforming finesse out of you and your partner, where you're going to have to learn to time double jump and dash a lot in this game. So when it requires this much platforming finesse out of you, the controls need to be very finely tuned to feel really good and feel very responsive. And that is something this game succeeds with flying colors. This is a tightly fine-tuned game from a controls perspective, and it makes the simple acts of things like double jumping, dashing, wall running very responsive and very satisfying to pull off. And what makes this even funnier is that I've recently been slowly making my way through Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which is another EA published game. And both of these games have sort of the same basic double jumping and wall running navigation and platforming gameplay. But I actually think Split Fiction outdoes Jedi Survivor with its control responsiveness and smoothness. I mean, when I went back to Jedi Survivor, I was actually annoyed that the game did not have a dash after using it so much in Split Fiction. And when I went back to Jedi Survivor as well, it just didn't feel as good to play compared to Split Fiction. Like, it still feels good to play. It's fine, but not as good as Split Fiction does. You know, as is typical with hazelight, I was amazed by some of the set pieces and gameplay mechanics that they were able to come up with. And I was also surprised by the number. I guess I shouldn't be, considering it's hazelight and this is their bread and butter, but I was surprised by the number of fun and creative ways the game forces co-op that requires quick and coordinated teamwork. And it just never really felt like they were running out of ideas or spinning their wheels when it came to co-op mechanics that make you trust your partner and vice versa in order to get through the game. And what's really awesome is during one of these final chapters, I kept remarking to Mario, who I did my first playthrough with, I kept remarking to Mario how impressed I was by how much mileage the game got out of a single mechanic. And another thing I really liked about Split Fiction is that they have sub-stories this time around, where you can leave the main world that you're in and go into these little bite-sized levels that are the complete opposite of what you've been going through. And what's unfortunate is I wanted a lot more sub-stories and maybe even some hidden ones, because I think, unfortunately, they make too much of a point of calling out the location of these sub-stories instead of letting the player or the partner naturally find them through exploration. And I think the game visually does a good enough job of kind of showing you where a sub-story is, just visually, to where these characters calling out, oh, hey, there's a sub-story over here, it kind of is unnecessary. But the issues I have with Split Fiction are more than I would have liked. And again, I really like Split Fiction. I think it's a very fun game. I had a lot of fun, and I had a good smile on my face by the end of it. But I definitely think it's a step down compared to It Takes Two. And I think the big core problem with this game is the structure. Unlike A Way Out and It Takes Two, where the core structure is just kind of go, 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 and it's constantly switching up gameplay mechanics and finding new things to do for the co-op experience. I feel like there are levels, especially big chunks of the game in Split Fiction, that kind of do start to get tiring after a while. And I said this with It Takes Two, where just when I thought the mechanic was kind of starting to get a little stale, like just on that little cusp of it, that's when it would switch up the gameplay and switch up the environment, or present a new curveball at me that I didn't see coming. Split Fiction, unfortunately, spends way too much time on a single visual or gameplay identity that didn't really wow me or was maybe more frustrating and clunky than fun. You can kind of establish a rhythm with this game that makes it predictable, unfortunately, where you have one big chunk that is science fiction, and then it switches over to one big chunk that is fantasy, rinse and repeat. And unfortunately, I think the fantasy levels in this game are vastly superior to the science fiction levels, both mechanically and visually. And, you know, this is just a personal perspective because I'm somebody who likes fantasy more than science fiction, but with this game, I just wish there was more visual variety to the science fiction stuff, where just environment-wise, gameplay-wise, it kind of just started to feel a little samey, where it's just this neon-soaked environment. You're kind of just getting that over and over again, or you're just getting a drab factory, whereas the fantasy levels are just this smorgasbord of color and different weird things and different camera angles and different mechanics. And these were, I really did think the fantasy levels are where hazelight put their best foot forward. And I think a pure fantasy game would have been better, in my opinion. Because although you wouldn't get that constant switching back and forth from science fiction to fantasy, I feel like my enjoyment of the game would have been more consistent if they had just stuck with the fantasy levels. So, kind of predictable structure to the game, doesn't quite have the constant switching up of mechanics and environment that A Way Out or It Takes Two did. But still, when it gets to those fantasy levels, especially the ones that are really, really great towards the second half of the game, then that's when I feel like Hazelight is just firing on all cylinders with Split Fiction. What's also unfortunate too is that the story and the writing leave a little bit to be desired, because look, I'll be honest, writing and story was never the strong suit of It Takes Two. It was always the level design, the fun gameplay mechanics, the amazing variety of environments that it had. That was the stuff that really carried It Takes Two. Split Fiction focuses more on the narrative this time around. And unfortunately, the characters are just not particularly that compelling through a good chunk of the experience. You don't really have that guiding central character in the beginning like that I love, like Dr. Hakim in It Takes Two, who I still quote to this very day. There's no I'm not saying the game literally needs to have Dr. Hakim popping up in the middle of this adventure and go, you need to fix your relationship. It doesn't need that. I just wish it had a more interesting character to kind of guide me along in the experience. Whereas in the beginning, Zoe and Mio, they're not particularly compelling during the first half of the game, but they grew on me towards the end. And what's also unfortunate is that I think their stories are just way too predictable and too often fall into the trap of expressing the cloying therapy speak that has kind of become a pet peeve of mine with video game writing. And look, this kind of talk, it makes sense in It Takes Two, because that game is a giant fantastical marriage counseling session. But when you have these two characters, especially when they have never known each other prior to the events of the game, I feel like it maybe needed a little bit, the relationship between Zoe and Mio needed a little bit more tension in the beginning before they finally start to trust one another and grow as friends throughout the game naturally. It kind of just seems like there's this hard point somewhere in the first third where they kind of stop having that tense relationship and start to being more buddy-buddy. By the end of the game, I did grow to like them. I did want to see where their stories would go, even though I knew where this was going, because again, this writing just can't help itself but to go, we need to fix what's in the problems that you have, and you need to learn to open up more. And I recognize your pain. It's like, oh my God, there's just quite one too many moments in this game that have this kind of annoying therapy speak where I was just rolling my eyes. And I just wish this therapy speak would just go away in video games. Just learn how to write characters more naturally. In conclusion, I did end up really liking Split Fiction. By the end of it, especially that final level is incredible. I think it's one of the best things that Hazelight has ever made. So I feel like getting to that final stretch of the game where it was just really wowing me. Maybe the one time in this game that really, really floored me with how creative it was. But it just doesn't hit the high mark of It Takes Two for me. So I'm a little surprised to see people saying that this is the best thing Hazelight has ever made, or it's the best co-op experience, because I felt like in some respects it was a big step down from It Takes Two, which again, I will repeat, I think It Takes Two is so fantastic that I don't think Hazelight will ever top it. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think about Split Fiction if you played it. And as always, I am Razorblade Mango. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.